All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for April 21st, 2021. May we please have roll call?
Chair Clark,
Here.
Vice Chair McGill,
Here.
Commissioner Baker, Commissioner Feck, Commissioner Lesnar Buxton,
You.
Commissioner Longstreet,
Here.
Commissioner Perry.
Present.
Okay. Do we have, or I believe you have a slide regarding public comment? Any member of the public may, well, any member of the public may address the commission on, can we go back so I can see that slide and read it, Rose? I don't have it memorized.
Daisy, can you escape?
Okay, any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time for public comments will be 15 minutes. Do we have anybody here that wants to speak on something that is not regarding a Parks and Recreation Department recommended budget discussion?
So I only see one attendee, and that is a staff member, so I do not believe, but I will read. For those who wish to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand functionality in the GoToWebinar control panel. We are currently displaying a graphic showing where that is located. When I call on you, please unmute yourself and then speak for a maximum of 2 minutes. For those who wish to speak on an agenda item later in the meeting, please raise your hand when the item is under discussion. And
Thank you.
No raised hands.
Okay, so that brings us to the business at hand. Discussion regarding the Parks and Recreation Department recommended budget. Pen.
Chair Clark, Commissioners. Oops. It's good to see you. We're having this special meeting at your request, planning to provide you with a focused presentation on the general fund portion of the Parks and Recreation Department budget. Next slide, please. And the plan for your meeting and the presentation is to run through some of the very standard slides we always provide you every year to remind ourselves of the context of our budget. And then also this same presentation will be provided next Wednesday at your meeting, along with the Golf Fund budget and the Creeks Fund budget. You know, we like to start our budget presentations talking about our mission. And of course, the Commission is very well aware of it, that Parks and Recreation is critical to this community's ability to provide clean and safe parks and beaches, recreation facilities, promote stewardship of resources, and really to provide quality recreation and cultural experiences for all Santa Barbara residents, and then also our visitors. Next slide, please. So as I said, today's presentation will be focused on the general fund. We'll dip into the miscellaneous grant fund for a very brief moment, and then focus more on the changes that we're proposing as a result of the financial impacts of COVID, but also the fact that we are still managing under restricted lifestyles, so to speak, because of COVID. And then we'll also talk a little bit about capital projects, anticipating that the Commission's discussion and questions will be mostly focused on how we're proposing to address funding shortfalls as we go into the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. So briefly, just again, as part of sort of setting the stage, this is the framework of management staff within the department. As you can see, we do have a new assistant director, which is wonderful, Jasmine LeBlanc. She's participating in today's meeting, as is recreation manager Rich Hanna and parks manager Matthew Parker. We currently have 2 vacancies in our management team. The business manager position is currently under recruitment. Hopefully will be filled by the end of the fiscal year. That position's been vacant since December, so we've been tag teaming. The recreation manager position has been vacant for 5 years, essentially since we had some change in management staff and originally kept vacant as a result of the closure of the Cabrillo Pavilion. And we've retained that vacancy as a result of COVID. When you look to the right of this slide, you'll see we have 19 programs. So our budgets are spread across 19 programs, 4 funds, 91, just over 91 permanent full-time equivalent staff, and about 73,000 hourly hours. So that doesn't mean there's 36 more full-time staff. It means there's staff, a number of staff that play a variety of roles in ensuring our department can function. Harkening back to 3 or 4 years ago, that number was closer to 130,000 hourly hours. So there's been changes for any number of reasons. Next slide, please. And then again, even though the focus today is on general fund, this gives the Commission a sense of what the total department's expense budget is, which is just over $25.5 million proposed for next year. Of that amount, just over 7 million is the Golf Fund and the Creeks Fund. So you back that out and you get to 17, 18 million for the general fund. Next slide, please. And similarly, when we look at revenues by fund, with a $25.5 million overall departmental budget, of that $25 million, just over 13 million comes from non-general fund revenues. Of that amount, the general fund represents just over 6 million. Traditionally has represented just over 6 million. We'll talk about how that's changing. Next slide, please. So on to the general fund. Next slide, please. So again, sort of hearkening back to what do we do and what do we want to do? We're parks are community assets, as we know, and under COVID, it's become even more apparent that the role parks play in our neighborhood play spaces, our ability to host gatherings, although those have been curtailed. At the same time, our opportunities to promote youth physical and social development, senior wellness and fitness, and really the importance of community livability and vitality. Next slide. And then when we look at how we do that, the broad reach of what we have for supporting the community expands all across Santa Barbara, from the beaches to the mountains, over 1,800 acres, any number of recreational facilities that people use for fees, for free, areas where children play, summer camps that are held, and lots of drop-in free opportunities to support the entire community. Next slide, please. And specifically, what we actually do, whether it's our staff or our contractors, we provide areas for people to have private events, for kids to go to summer camp, for community special events to occur, where low-income families can seek out social services in a different environment. And critical to everything that we do relates to the community partner collaborations that we have across the city. Over 200 organizations we collaborate with in order to provide the programs and services for a broad cross-section of Santa Barbara's residents. Next slide, please. So when we look specifically at the budget numbers, our recommended budget for fiscal year 22 is just under $18 million. Of that amount, 5.7 is proposed for revenue. And I'm going to stop there for a minute and let the commission know when we send out your packet for your regular meeting, you will have more of a staff report. We've been scrambling a bit to pull all this together for you, so you'll actually see a written narrative that gives you some more information. Next slide, please. When we look at the general fund and what makes up the staff in the general fund, if you recall from the first slide, it showed just over 91 full-time equivalents. What's not included in here are the Creeks Division staff. So the general fund staff represent 82.15 permanent staff in the department. That has changed over time now that we don't have a golf division. If you look at our personnel across the years, been fairly steady. The proposed number of staff for next year is the same as it was for last year, and the same as it will be for the subsequent year. The difference will be as we look and share with you our plans to reduce expenses, is to take advantage of some of the staff vacancies that we have in order to meet the budget reductions that we need to meet. Next slide, please. So in addition to what we'll get to in a minute in terms of the reduction, our budget does include 2 position changes. We share that with the commission every year, and as well as council. We have 2 existing staff members that we had a reclassification assessment done, and they will be promoted up and to new positions, the sports recreation specialist to a recreation coordinator. The rationale for this change is the duties of this position have evolved under COVID and expect to continue to be expanded under COVID to more of a coordinator level, and also in light of the fact that we're leaving a recreation specialist position vacant as part of our cost savings. And then similarly, we have an office specialist in our department who's taken on more responsibility, in part due to COVID and in part due to the fact that we've had to reduce hourly staff hours and brought in this person's role in the department to a higher level of an administrative specialist. So we're balancing some of those reductions with the realization and the expectation that some of our existing staff are stepping into new roles, and as a result, their positions get reclassified. And they're recognized for the work that they are doing. Next slide, please. To get into sort of expenses by category, this is something that the commission sees regularly. I want to walk through this a little bit because it begins to tell you the story. Fiscal year 20, COVID started in March officially for California. So as you can see, when you look at our expenses in fiscal year 20, it's just under 16 million. Our projected expenses in fiscal year 21 are similar to fiscal year 20. If we were in a normal year going into fiscal year 22, our status quo budget would be just over $19 million. So as you can see, the change between what we actually spent and what would, if you looked back to fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, you would have seen $18 million in fiscal year 20, $18 million, 18 and a half and 21, but we've actually spent 2.5 and more, less than that over the next 2 years. So when you see a status quo number that gets generated by our finance department, all things being equal, COVID not existing, everything existing as it did pre-COVID, the expense budget was anticipated to be around 19 million. We're proposing an expense budget just under 18 million. So just over $1.1 million in expense reductions going into fiscal year 22. Then you jump to fiscal year 23 because this is a 2-year plan, and you can see the status quo again bumps up again. But then you see that our proposed budget also goes up. So as part of our plan, we have a short-term continued decline in revenues that we have to account for in terms of reducing our expenses, and anticipated that perhaps this time next year, as we're looking to July 2022, which is the fiscal year 23 budget, we are getting back to some normal operations, and we're returning programs and services to pre-pandemic levels. Next slide, please. And then when you look at it by division, this tells a little bit more of the story that we'll get into. You can see our actuals, again, just under 16 million for the last 2 years, and then the proposed for the next couple of years. And the breakdown in change, if you start with recreation, the difference in recreation from status quo of 8.5 to 7.8, the status quo of administration from 1.8 to 1.6, and then parks from 8.6 to 8.45. And we'll give you more details about that. And then again, you see that there's a proposed rebound in fiscal year 23, assuming everything comes together and we can move forward back to our normal operations. Next slide, please. And then briefly, we generally like to review this with the commission to give the commission a sense of what these funds are actually spent on in park operations. So actual funds spent in city parks is $5.85 million a year. Medians and parkways, so that's streets, is 561,000. Forestry, of which a portion of that those forestry funds are spent on trees in city parks. About $1 million is spent on city street trees. And then beach maintenance is around 140,000. So it gives you a sense of how that 8.45 breaks down. And we get into more specific what's in actual park operations, because in park operations we provide services to other departments that aren't parks. So I misstate, my initial statement was slightly incorrect. Next slide, please. And then in recreation, our expenses by program. Our recreation division is diverse. We do lots of great things for the community, whether it's for youth, for older adults, families in need, families that do sports. And as you see this pie chart, the breakdown of where our expenses are, largely starting with aquatics. Pools are expensive, as we know. And then youth activities is a critical component, dropping down to facilities and special events, community services, and active adults. And then sports, tennis, and pickleball. Next slide, please. When we look at our revenues and where our revenues are proposed to come from, they're 5.7 million next year. The bulk of it is in recreation programming and facility rentals. Interdepartmental transfers relate to the services that park staff provide to other departments. And then we have bits and pieces, including, for example, rents, which come from our nonprofit leases. Next slide, please. So revenue by source, just as a little bit more information. This gives you the breakdown. It also looks at where we've been in fiscal year 20. Our revenue was just over 4.3 in fiscal year 20. We closed up shop essentially for the last quarter of that year. This year, our projected revenue is even lower as a result of the ongoing pandemic. all things being equal, no pandemic, we would have been looking more at like $6 million in revenue. So that's where that status quo number comes from. If things had been more normal in 20 and 21, our revenues would have been closer to that number. To account for what we anticipate will happen in the next year, which is we won't be returning to normal, we're proposing a revenue budget of just over $5.7 million next year. The changes that primarily are noted in this budget slide relate to the recreation programming and facility rentals being the most significant drop and change in revenues. And then as the slide shows, going to fiscal year 23, we're hoping and anticipating that as we return to normal again, our revenues will return back to pre-pandemic levels. Next slide, please.
Phoebe, did you want to ask a question?
It's been such a tough year with the rentals. Now we've moved into yellow. Do we anticipate it changes at this point? How is this looking going forward?
Well, we talk about it every single day, particularly the recreation staff and our facility staff, because that's, you know, in addition to the programming, and a lot more outdoor programming has been possible, which has been wonderful, and it's growing. But the uncertainty and the unknown right now has to do with private use of facilities, whether it's indoor facilities or outdoor facilities. So, for example, under the orange tier, there's different requirements based on the number of individuals, whether the individuals are vaccinated or are in part of a weekly COVID testing program, and then whether it's inside or outside. Right now, under the orange tier, for example, the group gatherings number is 50, and under red it was 25 outdoor, and under orange indoor, there's an opening for numbers of indoor based on the assumption that everybody attending the event is vaccinated or is part of a weekly testing program and is tested negative COVID. Amongst other things related to what catering styles allowed, all of those different elements. And I have to give a shout out to Susan Bardick and Rich Hanna and Sarah Knowles and Jasmine's been involved, just trying to figure out based on the county health order, the state health order, what we can and cannot permit. But we're hoping in May we'll have some more opportunities, and there's definitely community interest. People want to find ways to get back to their normal activities. We've included in our budget, and go over that in more detail, a slow return to normal, but an expectation that the number of events and the size of events will be quite small, much smaller than before, and that it could be until the new calendar year that things are more normal, assuming we don't again go back into a health crisis that we've been in.
So we're basically waiting for more clarity from county public health and, you know, some straight guidelines.
Yeah, we get the guidelines, the updates all the time, and then we turn those into determining what we can and can't do. And we've had people making reservations and rebooking their weddings, and we're still trying to provide the service based on what's allowed under the health code.
Thank you.
Daisy, could I have the next slide, please? So this gives you an idea of revenue by program and the proposed revenue for fiscal year 22. Essentially declines across the board with a few bright spots. Tennis and pickleball have been rocking. I want to also give a shout out to our sports staff and our aquatic staff for just doing a fantastic job giving people opportunities for outdoor exercise. Our youth activities staff for both running summer camp last year and gearing up for hopefully an awesome, safe summer this year as well, with the opportunity to provide more camp opportunities for more children now that we're moving into a time where we think we can manage and better understand the health requirements. Next slide, please. So we briefly, and I'm going to dive into sort of reductions and issues now, but again, just wanted to make sure the commission had a full sense of kind of the nuts and bolts that we have to do irrespective of COVID impacts. We have about 186 recreation program and facility fees. We're proposing 10 new ones, discontinuing 6 programs don't exist, and then only moderate increases, decreases for 23, so just over 10%. As in similar years, we're looking primarily at making sure we're achieving the cost recovery if costs go up for some reason, and those are direct costs. Also looking at competition and then trying to maximize participation. Next slide, please. And so just as an example, some of the recommended fee changes and the rationale for those. Select youth camps are going up a bit because there's higher operating costs for labor and excursions. Junior guards, we have a new 3-week camp offering. Aquatics fees, water and chemical costs keep going up. So we're always subsidizing aquatics programs. It's definitely not an area that is 100% cost recovery. And similarly, adult sports leagues and tennis lessons, and then pickleball permit fees, all just increase costs and trying to keep pace with that. Next slide, please. And then lastly, miscellaneous grants fund. Commission is well aware of this. This is where we have the opportunity to hold funds from year to year. They're not subject to the general fund ebb and flow for special projects and programs. And though that grants fund continues to help support activities that we do throughout the department in a range of program areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so into what we're proposing and looking for the commission's discussion and feedback. Next slide, please. So overall, our proposed expense budget represents just over a $1.1 million reduction over what would have been a normal year. Of that amount, we were asked to reduce our budget just under $775,000 as part of the citywide effort to respond to the fact that lower revenues overall for general fund operations. In building our budget and looking at our potential revenue sources and our costs, as well as our ability to deliver some of these programs as we continue to have COVID-related restrictions, knowing that there's some programs that would be more difficult to deliver. We've actually included another just over $350,000, $352,000 as a reduction. As I mentioned in earlier slides, as I showed the commission the budget numbers for fiscal year 23, those numbers don't include any reductions. Again, anticipating a return to pre-pandemic revenues and rebuilding from where we were. Granted, we don't know what's going to happen over the next 12 months. We want to be optimistic, and we may be before the commission this time next year with different recommendations based on what's happening in the community, in the country, and the world as it relates to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So when we came up with the reductions that we'll walk through, we had a number of considerations. Some of this that the commission is very familiar with. The fact that although we expect indoor and outdoor facilities to be reopened, there's going to be strict capacity limits and other health order restrictions, which may mean that we're not renting and supporting programs, or at least private rentals, or even community events, certainly community events, to the extent that we have in the past. So that has a revenue impact to the department. Similarly, limited summer camp capacity, balancing the need to make sure youth are safe in our programs so that the numbers in each program will still be reduced. We're hopeful there'll be more than 10 per pod. I'm planning for 14. And Rich Hanna can speak to that more specifically if you like. And then we expect, as we've already experienced, that special events and larger gatherings will continue to be restricted for the first half of the year. So some of this is revenue-based, and some of it also is staff-based and stuff-based. So for example, we have hourly staff that we hire to support facility monitoring, facility rentals, summer camps, special events. If those events aren't happening, then we don't need those staff to do those, provide that level of service or to provide that work for the department. Similarly, if we're not renting a facility, we can reduce some of our supplies and services costs because we're not incurring that cost. We're not getting the revenue, but we also don't have the expense. So that's one of the things we look at is like, if we're not going to do it anyway, because we can't, or nobody wants it, then that's it. That's where we should be reducing an expense in the budget. Next slide, please. And then also just being pretty realistic and rational in terms of trying to take advantage of a situation that isn't ideal, which is staff vacancies, and then also to try to retain some sort of flexibility and be strategic about the funds that we do have. So we have a number of vacancies. The department has had tremendous turnover in the last 5, 6, 7 years with retirements, new staff coming on and leaving town because the cost of living in this town is so high. We've also had a lot of staff that have been promoted, and that's created a vacancy behind them. And then it's sort of created a domino effect. So we've been recruiting nonstop for many years. We currently have a number of existing vacancies, and looking at them as the position's vacant, we can achieve savings there as long as that position's not critical to a basic service that we're providing as a department. That makes sense. So we are recruiting right now. We are filling positions. For example, we have a vacant park ranger position. We have a vacant parks lead position. I mentioned the business manager position. All of those positions are being filled. So we're prioritizing which positions get filled because they're critical. We can't really function without it. And some of the positions aren't being filled because we're not necessarily providing that program or service. The next bullet talks about, we're also planning flexibility in terms of increasing staffing as revenue increases. So projecting, as Commissioner Longstreet mentioned, well, as things open up and people are, using more facilities, we're going to need that staffing. And so we're trying to project, well, we'll need that staffing by such and such a date. When do we start recruiting? And what do we save in the interim when we don't have someone in that position? I mentioned earlier, we have very little discretion over pretty much most of our budget, whether it's allocated costs, salaries and benefits. We have a little bit of money that we're allowed to sort of decide what to do with. Keeping those funds, because that gives us flexibility to either put them into a position if we fill the position or use them for another purpose. And then lastly, in thinking about what moving forward, we have prioritized our free summer fun program and then also bringing back our youth apprentice program, slightly retooled for the youth apprentices that actually we think will make it a much more effective and successful program. Next slide, please. So just over 1.13 million for our reductions. We have currently 9 vacant positions of the 82 in our general fund. Proposal includes keeping 6 of those positions vacant through the entire fiscal year and delaying filling 3 positions until January 22nd, January 2022. One of the challenges that we have is that we can't count the full cost of that position because there's a CalPERS allotment for every position you have, whether there's someone in that position or not. So there's discounted, and Jasmine LeBlanc can speak to more of that. We also have significant reduction in our hourly staff funding. And that's around sort of what are we doing, not doing, what can we give up? And then some reductions in our supplies and services because we're not going to pursue a program, or that expense won't be incurred because we're not renting that facility, so it doesn't need to be cleaned as often. That gives you a sense. Next slide, please. When we look at how that lays out across the division, it shows you, the recreation division and the administration division are shouldering most of the reductions as a % of that division budget. Parks division less so, represents just under 3%. Again, prioritizing park services. because it doesn't matter whether we have the revenue or not, we still need to provide the park services. And this number backs out the funding that we get for waterfront, to provide service in waterfront, service that we provide to the Public Works Department in Sheffield. That's not part of a reduction. It's the general fund portion of the Parks Division is the reduction. Next slide, please. So what does that translate to in terms of positions? Just over 650,000. The positions proposed to remain vacant. The recreation manager, again, year 6, recreation coordinator, administrative specialist in community services, head pool lifeguard, which is a permanent part-time position. We have a recreation specialist position that was assigned to tennis. And then the administrative analyst in the administration division, that position was vacated in November of last year, and we're not proposing to fill it for an entire year. We have 3 positions, of which 2 are vacant, and 1 will be vacant in a couple of weeks due to a retirement. And that proposal there is to keep them vacant for 6 months. So what that translates to in terms of how you bring these people on, we would start recruiting for those 3 positions in September with the idea it generally takes 3 to 4 months to bring someone on. They would be ready to go January 1, 2022. In a number of cases, we can backfill with hourly. So it's not a full loss, but there's a way to sort of buffer that absence. In terms of the positions in recreation administration, we're not proposing to backfill much with hourly there. We're making do with what we have. Next slide, please. So I mentioned hourly staff reductions and why. Recreation programs that may not be provided, facility monitors that we may not need so much of, front desk support staff have been hourly staff traditionally, and they've been, the backbone of many of our operations, and then also support for the administration division, reducing those hourly staff, which means more work gets spread around to the permanent staff. And we have to, figure out what's the highest priority. Next slide, please. In terms of what that means in service level impact, some of these reductions we implemented, yes.
But before we move on from the employee reductions, I was just wondering, you said some people have been promoted and the positions behind them haven't been filled yet. And with the other reductions in staff, and everybody having to kind of pick up the slack or taking on more roles and responsibilities, like, what is that doing? How are your employees doing? Are they just morale okay? Are they just exhausted? I mean, I know you've taken on so much. How are people doing with the extra work? Are they feeling positive?
Chair Clark and commissioners, I would not be surprised if everybody said that it's been a tough year. And it's been a tough year for everybody on different levels. And we are sort of a bit stretched, to be honest. At the same time, we are trying to do our best to get back to what we consider more normal, to take the initiative, the efforts that we have and are focused on to make them the most valued. We've done things differently in order to increase our service in different ways that both serve the public under the pandemic. And I mentioned, recreation staff in particular, just being really creative about how to reopen facilities. Los Baños pool, and correct, I could be wrong, I don't think it's ever operated the way it's operating right now. And that's to a large extent because the staff there have really made it happen so that so many people have been able to enjoy that sport. And similarly, when we did summer camp last summer, and we'll do summer camp this summer, staff are being really creative in figuring out how to do things differently. But yes, just like everybody else in the community, we are tired. That's why partly we're balancing the fact that, if we have a way to save, even if it's not ideal, it doesn't take another bite out of the program, it doesn't take another bite out of the department. It tries to keep whole what's there now. and not reduce more in terms of what we have. And then also, and it's hard to explain this, but strategically as things change and our needs change, in working with the management staff, our decision making may evolve over the course of the year and realize, wow, we really need to fill that position now. Let's do it, and then we'll do something differently if we still need to come up with that savings. So we still have flexibility in what we do. It's not like as of July 1, nothing changes until June 30th of next year. We're constantly evolving and evaluating and taking advantage of different opportunities. I would also give a shout out to the park staff, working with our fire department, bringing in CAL FIRE to help with some of the vegetation management needs that we have in our high fire hazard areas, working with our trails organizations that come in and done some really valuable trail work. We don't have the staffing to do that. So still doing things that add value and add benefit to the community, despite the fact that we're just trying to manage. I would say we're in a very different place today than we were this time last year. Last year was really tough on so many levels. Last summer was really tough. And as long as the community keeps moving in a positive direction, we're ready to jump in and figure out how to manage. So yeah, it's been challenging. And part of what the city's also doing is coming up with its reopening plans so that we can feel like we're getting back to something more normal city operations and have more people interacting one-on-one rather than completely dispersed. So if I could keep going. So when we presented this to the commission last May, some of the things we presented, we are continuing. So when we reduce our hourly staff, it affects our facility operations. So for the Franklin Neighborhood Center, we eliminated the hourly staff there under COVID. So we have reduced reception hours. Westside Community Center is appointment by only. We're also short-staffed there. The Davis Center, our exterior improvements are under construction. When those are complete, we didn't have enough money to do the interior. The plan is only to open it for rentals until the beginning of 2022. In part because we won't have any staff there. We've eliminated the hourly staff that otherwise would have been at that facility. And then senior programs, the extent to which they can restart, and again, that's uncertain, we can house those at the Westside Center temporarily. For Career Recreation and Cabrillo Pavilion, we're hoping to open, but we'll have reduced operating and reception hours. And some of it's based on what activities happen. We just finished an RFP process to bring in return fitness providers and dance groups and different things to the Career Recreation Center. So as that builds, the staff will build to support it. And then for the building here, Administration 620, we will again, as with last year, be open by appointment only because we've eliminated the hourly staff that support this section of the department. And I would just say one more thing. One thing I would add is we're balancing that with the fact that we have a lot more people using online ways to communicate and do business with the city. And there's always someone at the end of a phone to be able to answer questions. Similarly, as we go into a reopening plan, there is going to be consideration for, non-city employees entering buildings and wanting to be sure that we create a safe environment for both the visitors and the staff as it relates to COVID. So ways to manage that again. I'm sorry, Commissioner Longstreet, I interrupted.
Can we go back to Cabrillo Pavilion? How is the concession there, the restaurant? Is that, what a time to try to open something like that, but do we have any feeling on how that's going?
Certainly, Chair Clark, Commissioners, we are working out an amendment to the agreement with the hope that construction will resume at the beginning of May, and the restaurant will be operational in August of this year. So we
That
have
would be wonderful news.
Yes, we're very much looking forward to that. We expect that Santa Barbara will continue to be Southern California's favorite destination on the weekend. And we expect that there will be many people in the city of Santa Barbara that are reluctant to travel too far away because of COVID. And our beaches will be just as busy as they were last year, and perhaps even more busy. And then also, return of some activities, some group activities, which will also bring more people to the beach. So we've been encouraging our restaurant lessee to inform them that they have a great opportunity to open soon.
Good, thank you.
Next slide, please. There's some other reductions and program changes that we're proposing with this budget. We have a free after-school youth sports program that we're not proposing to fund. Again, that's in savings in staff costs, and it's no cost recovery. We have some traveling summer camps, and then Concerts in the Park is another program. Don't see us having concerts in the park this summer. So because of that situation, it makes sense to not set aside funds for something like that when we should be spending them on something that we can do. We are restarting our youth apprentice program, and I believe the recruitment's underway and training. Historically, the department has paid the wages of youth apprentices that are placed in other city departments. So as a way to reduce costs to our department, we will be looking to other city departments to provide the funds, the hourly staff salaries, to hire youth apprentice program participants. So that's an intro salary for a number of hours, and it would ensure that Parks and Recreation's not bearing all of the burden for those youth. We do all the training. We'll be doing some of the hiring. So a lot of times, a lot of those youth are part of our programs and services, and we already have a couple of projects lined up. And then similarly, we'll have a reduced capacity because, again, reduced staffing to support sports leagues and field reservations and indoor-outdoor facility rentals. Again, as things pick up and if revenues come back more quickly than we anticipate, we'll be able to bring the staff back to be able to support those programs. Next slide, please. When we talk about parks, we have delay in recruitments. So given that, and given the realities that we have a diverse park space, we have basic general maintenance tasks that have to be done: mowing, cleaning, restrooms, playground inspections, fixing things, any number of cleanup activities, as well as some landscape work. For the next number of months, that will be continue to be the primary focus of park staff. And we've placed a small amount of money in special projects to help support them in landscape maintenance. So the more tedious, time-consuming work effort that has to happen in certain areas, whether it's Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden, Chase Palm Park, different park areas where we have more developed landscapes that need to be maintained more consistently. And given the need for park staff to focus on general maintenance, a way to sort of balance the reduction and the delay in hiring. Would also add that we have had over many, many years a real difficulty hiring hourly staff that are capable of providing the support services for our park staff, and are increasingly looking at ways to supplement those hourly staff with special projects that we hire a landscaper to help us with on a case-by-case basis. And then for administration, that administrative analyst position is one that was very difficult to secure, and it took many years to get it approved, and has been critical for a number of our long-term planning and policy and work management initiatives, whether it's the Urban Forest Management Plan, whether it's the sign program, whether it's the amendments to the municipal code. I mean, any number of initiatives that we've done, those will slow down and go in pause mode until we're able to fill that position. Next slide, please. Stay in pause mode. What I would like to share with the commission is that we're restoring the free summer fun program. That was a big loss last year. It includes, as it has in previous years, a subsidy of $140,000. So if you think of the reductions we've taken elsewhere in the department, this one we've prioritized and not reduced. And this represents almost 50% of the departmental reduction that we needed to make. So we've prioritized that. The Woods Clayson's Foundation allowed us to keep the funds that they granted last year that we didn't spend, so that will also support the program. Would add that the number of youth served will decrease as a result of COVID restrictions. But again, hopefully it's a one-time thing. And this time next year, we'll be able to serve more youth. The cost won't change because the per person to camper and all the other different things we have to do will likely require a similar level of funding. And then we have a number of outdoor youth and adult sports programs that we're restoring with the caveat that they recover costs. So again, one of the decisions that the department had to make last year, which is if it's not bringing in revenue, we can't do it because the city has no revenue. So, but we're happy to report that we think there's an increasing balance between us being able to support those types of programs because we will get some revenue coming in for them. Next slide, please. All right, I can pause there, but I'd also like to present to the commission because this is a request that came forward from Councilmember Eric Friedman and also Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez has also been engaged working with the school district to come up with a new program that would be developed over the next year and then launched in summer 2022. So not this summer, but next summer. It's a program that will be discussed by the city council as part of their budget review and budget hearings. It's currently not funded in our department. So we did not allocate funds. We were asked to develop cost estimates for what our role as the Parks and Recreation Department would be in this program. And then ultimately it'll be a council deliberation as to how to fund that. Next slide, please. So the idea is that the city hosts a summer nights program and that it's intended to help address increases in youth violence and create healthy changes for families. It would be done in collaboration with the school district, the city, and other youth family service providers. It would include sporting activities, access to health and wellness resources. It'd be housed at the La Cumbre Junior High, I think is the location that it would be housed, and it would be an evening program that would also include families. Next slide, please. So in putting together the budget, and Rich Hanna can give you more details on this, we estimated our role as a department would be about $90,000, of which a portion would be this fiscal year, excuse me, fiscal year 22 for startup and initiation, since summer starts in June. And to get summer started in June, you have to start in April. So April, May, June, April, May, you're preparing for June, July. August maybe, and that the actual implementation in summer 2022, which would be the next fiscal year, would be about 50,000. This assumes just what we would need to participate in terms of staff resources and some stuff. It assumes there's additional sources of funding from foundations and other donors, and also in-kind contributions, particularly from the school district in terms of providing space at La Cumbre Junior High. So I share that with you, certainly like the commission's discussion, and as the commission meets next Wednesday, we will be asking for your formal recommendations on our proposed budget, not tonight, more it's an opportunity to give you the introduction. So with that, let's jump to the next slide, because I think it goes into capital and I think it makes sense. Oh, one more slide, just as we keep reminding everybody, things that aren't in our budget, if you got your water rate notice, it's going up again. So there's a 6% increase in rates each year over the next 3 years. Would like to point out that the department continues to freeze its irrigation practices to 2013 levels. As water rates at that point, probably by the end of the next 3 years, will have gone up probably 75%. We've had some assistance, increased general fund allocation along the way, but it's not been to return us to post-drought. The level of irrigation that we actually know our parks need, so we continue to manage it in terms of prioritizing sports fields, certain areas of our parks over others. And then minimum wage will increase. It's something that got put on hold by the governor during the pandemic. It's something that while we may get additional general fund support to cover that increased cost, that's a state mandated, what it doesn't do is it doesn't then take into account the other people that are also at that wage rate that aren't entry-level employees. So when you have an entry-level employee come in at $15 an hour, someone who's been here for 3 years is making $15.50. They really probably need to be making $16.50. So the cost to the department is that additional cost for those other staff, not the incremental cost of the hourly wage. So that's the compaction, is that you end up having too much compaction, and then the competitiveness of the department to retain staff decreases. Just putting it out there because it's one of those other things at some point we will have to figure out how to deal with, and we don't have an answer yet. So with that, I will stop. There's more slides related to capital. Those can wait till next Wednesday. It's really at the commission's discretion. Happy to answer questions. And again, Jasmine LeBlanc, Rich Hanna, and Matt Parker are also participating in this meeting, so they can answer questions that you have.
Thank you. Who has questions? So am I correct? You can ask questions before we move to public comment. I believe there may be. Yeah, Commissioner Perry?
You know, parking fees were mentioned, and I'm wondering which facilities generate parking fees.
Chair Clark, Commissioner Perry, at the Davis Center, we have the Lombo's facility, and then we also have a set of designated parking areas that we sell parking passes for.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Go?
Well, I've been jotting down a number, but some of it might just come up in discussion. So the thing you brought up last, the council summer nights program, how far along is the planning for that, and who's involved in the planning, and what do you see as the sort of way forward and timeline for that? And then that's kind of the big general question. And then is there a community program that is being modeled after? I'm just kind of curious how this has come to pass and where it's going and how.
Chair Clark, Commissioner McGill, yes, it is modeled. There's successful summer nights programs in the LA area. I'm going to ask Rich Hanna to jump in because he's been the point person for the department, working with the school district and others on defining this effort.
Good evening, Chair Clark and Commissioners. To answer your question, Ms. Zachary is correct. We have modeled this after some similar programs, both in LA, up in Washington. We're starting to see this more and more as a common way to bring the community together to have positive activities after school and evenings that not only support youth, but also families in providing some of these critical services. The discussions at this point have been framed around developing the type of program that we could offer, the amount of funding that it would require to deliver those programs. And we're still working very closely right now directly with the school district. I work with their liaison, Ismail Huerta, to work on how the program will be delivered to the community. We as a department do not have the staff resources, or both from an administrative standpoint, but also from a program delivery standpoint, to staff this program. You know, we're looking at a junior high program after school between the hours of 5 to 9 p.m. Thursdays through Saturdays, with a variety of activities that Ms. Zachary explained in her PowerPoint presentation. It's our hope that as we go through this profit, either a nonprofit youth service provider or the school district will step up and actually take over the administration of this. And the Parks and Recreation Department would then default into a support service, similar to how we require other nonprofit youth and adult service providers to support us in programs that we deliver. So the program is being worked out right now. We do not have funding for it. We've developed a model based on these other programs to deliver the program, but we have not taken it past that point at this time.
And will this, when it's brought up to council in the budget deliberations, is this going to be discussed as a separate line item budget, or is it going to get rolled into our discussion, which I would have a rather large concern with?
Chair Clark and Commissioner McGill, it would be additional funding. It's our understanding is the council would allocate additional funding for this program.
So it would be treated as a totally separate line item and not rolled into your discussion.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's our understanding, yes.
So it would be taken care of with general fund? Not.
However, the council decides to fund it, we wouldn't, it has not been our direction to reduce other departmental programs to support this.
I have a question, Mr. Hanna. What age of youth would be hoped to be the primary beneficiary of the program? How young are you thinking, or how old?
Chair Clark and Commissioners, that's a good question. The program is designed for youth, teenagers, and families. So when we talk about this, we're talking about an extension of a typical camp day. So as you're familiar with, many of the programs and services we provide are targeting kids as young as 3 years of age up to, I would say, junior high level. We do not have a lot of teen type programs in the summertime, so we would really be targeting those teenagers, junior high into high school, but then allowing parents to bring both their younger kids, their teenagers, and parents themselves to come and participate and receive some of these resources that would also be available in addition to the recreation and enrichment programming. So it really would cover all bases, but it's going to be offered at a time when a traditional summer camp type program would end. And I'm basing that on what we deliver, but also what I see, other nonprofits deliver, like the Boys and Girls Club here locally. When their programs typically end, there's nothing other than kids go home. This would be picking that model up and continuing it for 3 evenings a week as we go into the weekend.
And how many kids, families can this program realistically provide for?
So Chair Clark and Commissioners, the budget that I developed for this was based off of how we operate our summer fund program. So we work on a 1-to-20 ratio for that program. So at this model, it's designed to be up to 200 people per evening based on the funding level that you saw in the proposed numbers. That number could increase if we have additional volunteers and other service providers there, but the budget itself is, if we were running the program as a city program, we'd be looking to serve 200 people each night for that period of time inside the financial limitations that were presented.
And then one last question, sorry. So in looking at the model communities, I mean, I'm just curious about this much. Has there been any kind of work done, or what work has been done that shows what kind of the tipping point is. How many kids do you need to reach for this actually to work? What percentage of the community do you need to reach with something like this for it to be effective?
Reach one kid, it's effective.
Well,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Chair and commission, I mean, I think, so the budget that so as Ms. Zachary has explained throughout this presentation, we have the ability to flex up staff and decrease staff based on staff to participant ratios. So to get to the basic question here, as long as we have 20 kids and we're dedicating the right amount of staff ratios for it to be safe, then the minimum would be 20. I don't have an analysis in terms of, what the ultimate goal is in terms of the total amount of families that we could engage in this program, because some of the service providers haven't come forward because we haven't identified a funding source at this time.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the reason I'm asking those kinds of questions are, this, I mean, could be a fabulous program, but would the money be better spent giving more scholarships to kids for summer fun programs? I mean, where do you actually achieve the greatest community benefit?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think, the models that are offered in other communities are actually offered in, parks in different neighborhoods throughout a city. And that really stretches your resources very thin. And they're usually done in cooperation with police departments and parks and recreation departments. This model is kind of centralizing it at La Cumbre Junior High to really bring an intense amount of participants to one location. And then if it's successful, if the model's successful, there has been discussions about taking that model and moving it over to the east side of town and having a similar program in the following fiscal year at Santa Barbara Junior High. The summer fun program that you mentioned, we will continue to operate that as we have in the past. It's $25 for all 8 weeks. So essentially it's free or fully subsidized for those kids to receive 8 weeks of programming for a full day. The department's still committing 106 scholarships to our youth programs. That hasn't changed. Some of those are general funded to the tune of about 10,000. And then we also have about 50 scholarships to the tune of $5,000 that we received from the Audacious Foundation. And we still continue to provide scholarships for our recreation after school program, our RAP program. So I don't have the answer to you and for you in terms of by funding this, are we taking away other opportunities for children to participate in subsidized programs? But I would say that we are continuing to offer scholarships at the level that we have in the past, both pre and now as we go post-pandemic.
Yeah, and taking away that's not really the nuance I was going for. It's more, it's not taking away from someone else. Is this really the best way to use the money, or are there programs existing that could benefit the community more if they were beefed up?
Yeah, Chair Clark and commissioners, I think there's been a lot of discussions recently and at council, even as late as yesterday, about youth safety and deterring kids from getting into bad habits and having positive activities. And I'm feeling between the school district, the city, and other service providers that there's a commitment to try to have more and more programming in the community to meet those needs. This is just one piece of that. And as I mentioned before, we just, as a Parks and Recreation Department or as a recreation division, we just don't have the bandwidth to take this program and run it like we would a summer fun program.
May I offer a couple of items, Chair Clark?
Are you still on the same subject? I'm not sure we're ready to move on. Yes, please, Commissioner.
Same subject.
Yes, please.
A reflection for you first, Rich. Once upon a time, Santa Barbara Sandpipers used to run summer evening all-comer track meets. You didn't have to be a runner. You didn't have to have any experience. You showed up in your Converse and you entered whatever events you wanted. Your 20-to-1 ratio more than fits that. It was a gas as a 12-year-old kid. You had to have no experience. You could run a 220 and whatever. Well worth looking into. We have City College. We have Santa Barbara High School that would cater those needs and fill our recreational mission. During my boys club years, I had conversations with a friend who was the commandant at the yacht club. They are also willing to provide and fund youth-related programs and could fit into the evening hours. They might be an interesting partner that may have been overlooked.
Chair Clark and Commissioner Perry, yeah, I've made note of both of those. I think, and of course, any service provider we can entertain to come out and provide these activities at both Santa Barbara Junior High, which does have a modified, or Lacumba Junior High, which has a modified style track, or programs down in the waterfront with the yacht club would be something we would look to explore with a third-party provider. I think that the nexus around this type of program is that it's within walking distance for residents. They can get their way there, whether it's public transportation or walk there. It's a site that they're familiar with because their kids go to school there. And there's just natural resources on site that make the delivery of this program safer. Anytime we start talking about moving kids and shuttling kids to different locations, the cost of a program goes up exponentially. That's just the way it is with transportation costs. And that's some of the reason you saw some of our traveling camps either reduced as part of the pandemic concerns that we have, or the cost of transport kids is just growing exponentially based, both pre and post pandemic to move kids from location to location.
Commissioner Longstreet.
I'd just like to say I'm glad we're talking about this. I'm glad to see that we are looking as a community at ways to support families and that particular age group that attends the junior high. There is no one ideal program. There's nothing that's going to stop youth violence. There's going to be 100 different things and 100 different people who reach out and touch a kid. And I am excited to see our relationship with the school district opening up again, because I think it closed down for a while, and it's all government and it all needs to work to the benefit of the entire community. So it's good to see that reopening, because we all need to be together to make sure that our kids are safe. And I think it's really interesting right now because we've seen so many mental health issues in the pandemic. So coming out and re-engaging kids, I am so happy to see summer fun, because I think a summer nights program targeting basically junior high, but younger and older is great. But, we want them in second grade. We want those kids to be active and happy and part of our community from early on. So I will be very curious. I can't wait to hear how this develops. I hope you will give us regular updates on how the planning is going. And I hope foundations like the Audacious Foundation, and I'm sure there's many others, will step up and say, this is what we want for our community. This is where we want to put our money, is towards our young people. So kind of give us an update, maybe quarterly on it, just so we know what progress is being made. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Two things. One, I think it would be really great, Rich, if you had some links to, you mentioned there were some similar summer night programs in LA. I'd love to read about those. That'd be great. And then I think all of us as commissioners, it might behoove us to remember that, with council so engaged in preventing youth violence and so engaged in getting kids involved in community activities and getting kids and families the resources they need, that perhaps during our budget discussion, we can just wrap our words around the fact that these are things that our department does, Parks and Recreation gives to our youth and families already. I think it's great to focus and have a special night, but it's something that the Parks Department has done for decades, every day. So, I'm not going to, I guess the word leverage is manipulative, but we might want to just, describe what the Parks Department does and compare it to a summer nights. It's like summer nights all the time. So let's fund the programs that are keeping these kids engaged now. That's all. Those are my thoughts. Vice Chair McGill, is that your, yes?
Yes, it is. Waving here. No, I mean, that's part of where I was coming from. I really want to sort of violently agree with you. There's a certain irony in having to scrap for every dollar for recreation programs for kids in the Parks and Recreation Department, and have kind of the side of me says that the sexy new program comes along and that's where we're all going to go. And I don't want to forget exactly what you just said, Chair Clark, that this department, consistently has been working with kids, and I don't want to lose that. And I guess but moving on, maybe there's also, I also don't want to lose maybe the opportunity with the schools. I've been struck the number of times there's been a discussion over the last few months about how, well, we can't do this with the schools because we don't have access to the schools. And every time I think, say what? This doesn't make any sense to me. And I really think in terms of going forward, and maybe even getting some updates there too, but getting some discussion going on how to really have a truly collaborative effort with the schools across the board in terms of what kinds of recreation opportunities we can provide to our youth. I think, yeah, it can only do the community good. So I'd appreciate any thoughts you have on that, Mr. Hanna.
Sure, Chair Clark and Vice Chair McGill. So the city works collaboratively with the school district, mostly through a joint use agreement. We also share a similar agreement with Santa Barbara City College, which shares resources to deliver programming, whether it's the school district's use of our facilities or our use of their facilities. That agreement has just recently expired, and we're actually just working with inside of the framework, kind of just in embracing the purpose of the agreement. That agreement, as it gets renegotiated, would be the opportunity to really put in these types of programs, the type of access that Parks and Recreation needs to deliver quality programs for kids, whether it's after school or in the summertime. And over the years, the department has lost some access to some school campuses, whether it's based on construction, because that's when they do a lot of their catch-up work for their school safety. But we've also had opportunities where, the size of the summer fun program in one campus becomes all-encompassing for that school principal. So they don't want to do it multiple years, but we've discussed maybe rotating that through a neighborhood. So we always have something up in the Mesa, McKinley school area. But we would want to formalize that through the joint use agreement so it becomes the decision of the school district superintendent and the city administrator and their designees, rather than at the principal level, which is where it can get a little complicated in terms of delivering programs. So certainly as we go forward with the negotiation of a new joint use agreement, we would be keeping the commission apprised of that, as well as, ultimately it's signed by city council.
And what's the timeline for that getting completed? Do you know?
We, Chair Clark and commissioners, so we spoke to the city administrator about this as we were starting to come out of the pandemic. We wanted to allow the school district just to return to their school model as they're ramping up to get kids back on campus. They have a very aggressive summer camp or summer school program that'll take place on 6 of the elementary school campuses. We anticipate we'll start negotiating with them in the summertime. And really at this point, it requires both the superintendent and the city administrator to kind of start that process. And then it's their designees work together to develop that agreement. And so that most likely include Parks and Recreation Department. There are other parts of the joint use agreement like crossing guards and access to other areas of the city that involve other departments, but primarily Parks and Recreation. And I believe I've been involved in most of this. I would be involved in a lot of those conversations for recreation programming. So summertime, early fall, that's probably most likely to start.
Okay, thank you. Let us know if there's any support that would be useful. Thank you.
Could I as we go into those negotiations, one of the things, and I don't think this has anything to do with Parks and Rec, honestly, but one of the things we've lost is access to campuses for kids to play after hours and on weekends. I know that's a budget issue, but it's an important issue, I think, to neighborhoods and relationships to schools and to our lack of field space in general as a community. So that's my 2 cents worth, but it's not for us to say about their campuses.
Chair Clark and commissioners, one of these days, hopefully we will be back in more in person, although maybe it'll be via GoToWebinar, but the city council and the school board used to have joint meetings. I think they were every 6 months. For a while, they were quarterly. It really depended. More often than not, Parks and Recreation item was on that agenda, including perhaps at some point in the future, a discussion of the joint use agreement. And that would also be an opportunity for the commission to attend and make comments. Certainly, we can bring a discussion of that like this back to you in terms of sort of community needs. We're always grappling with kids needing more places to play, and a constant request that the city provide it all when we know that there's other open spaces in the community that if there was a way to make them accessible and available could be a real benefit.
Thank you. Are there any further questions at this time? If not, we can move to public comment. Ms. Navarez, is there anybody here who is raising their hand to speak?
Chair Clark, yes, we have Jeff Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, I will unmute you. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. This is about water. Some years ago, I was at Shoreline Park, and the grass was really down and dying. And I looked into it, and apparently the Parks Department had run out of money for the water for that year. And then I brought up reclaimed water. And I was told the system was completely broken and messed up, and it would take millions to fix it. But I think I heard it did get fixed. I'm hoping it got fixed. So I'm just asking you to make sure the parks have plenty of water or the money to buy the water, and to somehow make that a big priority. Without water, everything dies, and makes a lot of jobs redundant. And the kids and everybody else wants to use those parks. So I saw a brief explanation of the water situation, and going back to 2013, I guess 7-8 years. I think that's when the parks looked really dry and brown and the grass was dying. So somewhere in the budget, I hope somebody figures out how to buy the basics to running a park, and that's water. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Does anybody have any further input or questions before I adjourn this meeting? Nope. Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Hanna and Ms. Zachary. Oh, did you want to talk? Did you have more? Please.
No.
I am adjourned. I adjourn.
Okay.
Wait.